Look here, you think you know the deadliest machines ever created? You've read the books, you've watched the documentaries, but you're missing the ones they didn't tell you about. Because the craziest, most impossible inventions of the Cold War and World War II weren't even intended to sink a ship. They were designed to redefine the laws of physics and change warfare forever. We're breaking down 6 of the craziest submarines in military history. I guarantee the last one will change everything you thought you knew about naval engineering.
Project 941, Typhoon-class submarine, USSR, 1980s. Let's start with the real monster, the Typhoon. You've seen the pictures. It's essentially an underwater city. It's the largest submarine ever built, and it's a perfect example of what happens when 2 world powers refuse to back down from an arms race. It was nearly 600 feet long. That's longer than 3 Boeing 747 jets lined up nose to tail. But that's not the craziest part. The craziest part is the pressure hull. You'd think it would just be one giant steel tube, right? But the Soviets didn't build one hull. They built 2 pressure hulls separated by an internal space. Thus, a torpedo could hit that gap, and the crew inside would feel virtually nothing. That made it practically unsinkable. The crew had access to a swimming pool, a sauna, and an animal area. An animal area! There was so much space that they had nowhere to put their belongings. But things get better. Her primary weapon was 20 R-39 Reef submarine-launched ballistic missiles. These missiles could hit any target on the continental United States. So you had a floating hotel designed for comfort, but its sole purpose was to guarantee a ceasefire. This is a Cold War conflict embodied in 48,000 tons of steel. I-400 Sentoku, Japan, World War II. We're closing the loop on Cold War paranoia, so we'll have to open a new one, dedicated exclusively to military audacity. You watch this channel because you're interested in impossible inventions, and nothing is more impossible than the Japanese I-400 Sentoku class. She was built during World War II when submarines were slow, simple, and used primarily to torpedo merchant ships. But the I-400 was designed as an underwater aircraft carrier. For her time, she was enormous, 400 feet long, the largest submarine built before the nuclear age, and her purpose was not to fight. Therefore, her intended purpose was to carry 3 Aichi M6A Seiran strike bombers. These were folding-wing aircraft housed in a giant, sealed hangar right on the deck. Now, every other submarine was a spear, but the I-400 was a hidden portal, designed to surface near the Panama Canal, launch 3 aircraft carrying biological or conventional weapons to bomb American cities or infrastructure, and then disappear without a trace. The U.S. didn't even suspect the existence of such submarines until after the war. It was a terrifying concept, not because of its size, but because it represented a complete rethinking of naval power.
USS Nautilus, USA, 1954. You see the I-400 and think, here it is, the pinnacle of technology. But 4 years after World War II, the United States launched a submarine that instantly made all previous submarines obsolete, the USS Nautilus. It was named after the submarine in Jules Verne's novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which makes sense, since in the 1950s, that was pure science fiction. It was the world's first nuclear submarine. Before the Nautilus, submarines were essentially battery-powered barges. They had to surface every few days to start their noisy diesel engines and recharge them, making them easy targets. That's why they were fundamentally limited in both range and endurance. But the Nautilus changed the physics of war. Its nuclear reactor allowed it to remain submerged and at full speed for months. The only limitation was the crew's food supply. This meant it could cross the entire Atlantic undetected. That's why this single submarine became the main villain for the world's conventional navies. The Nautilus proved that control of the seas would now belong to ships capable of moving silently, staying at great depth, and never surfacing for air. It was this technology that years later enabled the USSR to build the enormous and complex Typhoon submarine.
Project 865, Piranha, USSR, 1980s. Back on topic. Use contrast to return from massive scale to ultra-minimalism. Turn the knife toward traditional thinking. Now, if you want better stories, you need contrast. We just looked at the largest and most destructive submarine ever built. But the Soviets, masters of naval contrast, also built the smallest manned attack submarine in history, Project 865 Piranha. You've struggled with the idea that bigger is better. I have specialized listening equipment designed to track typhoons failed to detect it. Thus, the enemy spent billions on whale tracking technology, but the real threat turned out to be a highly specialized silent flea they didn't even know existed. It's a perfect example of what happens when size dictates strategy, not ego.
HMS M2, United Kingdom, 1930s. We're closing the circle of stealth. Therefore, we're opening a new circle of pure madness. This submarine proves that sometimes the greatest impossible invention is the one that's a terrible idea. After World War I, the British Navy wanted something out of the ordinary, but they created HMS M2. She began her history as an M-class submarine, a heavily armed submarine cruiser. But that wasn't enough. The admirals wanted a more sophisticated weapon for detecting enemy ships. So they got rid of the 12-inch deck gun and replaced it with a fully functional watertight aircraft hangar. HMS M2 was an underwater float plane carrier. The idea was this: the submarine would dive, sneak up on the enemy fleet undetected, then surface, open the hangar door, launch a tiny Parnell pedo float plane to spot targets over the horizon, and then dive again. The process of surfacing, launching, and diving took just 4 minutes, but these were the most dangerous 4 minutes in naval history. The hangar door had to be completely watertight before the submarine could submerge. If the door opened underwater, the entire submarine would sink in seconds. Essentially, it was a ticking time bomb that the crew had to manually defuse with the giant hangar door every time they used their aircraft. And as expected, in 1932, the hangar door opened slightly after submersion. The M2 sank in less than a minute, taking its entire crew with it. A brilliant invention, but a disastrous design.
Project Avancum, UK, Canada, World War II. Now, you've seen the gigantic, aerial, nuclear, and suicidal, so we'll have to end with the one designed for ice travel. It's the most impossible invention of World War II. After the Battle of the Atlantic, the Allies, the hero of our story, was struggling with long-range submarines, the villain. So the solution had to be equally absurd: a massive, unsinkable aircraft carrier made of ice. This was the code name for Project Avancom, or Avacom. The idea was an aircraft carrier made of pykrete, a supermaterial created from wood pulp and ice. This material was bulletproof, amazingly strong, and self-healing. It was to be over 600 meters long, carry dozens of aircraft, and be completely invulnerable to German torpedoes. But the carrier was so large that the logistics of its construction, even with the self-healing ice, quickly became a real challenge. Thus, the aircraft carrier idea was abandoned and reduced to a submarine concept, Project Avancom. The submarine was to be made of pykrete and use ice for both its hull and fuel. The project ultimately failed due to its extreme impracticality and high cost. But the fact that the world's two most powerful nations in the 1940s sincerely believed in the possibility of creating a self-healing, stealthy submarine powered by ice propulsion proves one thing.
So, if you were interested in exploring these impossible projects, subscribe to my channel. It's free.